Hey guys, this is gonna be another video on how to play a faction, and this time we're covering the Imperial Navy. I know a lot of people play them and they have a pretty large fleet selection, and not all of them are good, so it's actually not that easy to make an effective composition. And this video will help you pick effective composition so you can actually win with them. You can see a new button here. I am on the beta branch patch, which was just released, and they also published the win rate statistics. And Imperial Navy is dead last. They have the lowest win rate. They seem like the weakest faction right now, but that's not actually true. It's just that most new players that are fans of the lore and stuff, they just play Imperial Navy because they're the good guys, they're the protagonists of the story. So they just play them, and they're new. They don't necessarily understand all the mechanics. There's a lot of ships to choose from, so it's not obvious what to pick and how to make an effective fleet. So I think that's the reason why they just have the lower win rate than other races, but it's not necessarily because they're bad. Also, there is a number of changes in the beta branch for the preview. There is a bunch of elder nerfs and some other changes for races. The Imperial Navy doesn't get any direct changes except for some small bug fixes, but the major change affecting everybody is the change to the critical rate resistance for bigger ships. Before there was a slight reduction for critical chance affecting ships for the bigger ones. Before, for example, the battleships had 40% resistance, but now all the rates get doubled. So battleships go from 40% resistance to 80% resistance. So now they only have 1/5 of a chance to suffer a critical hit. So that means that they are extremely resistant to critical hits. They're gonna suffer 3 times less critical hits than before, which is a really huge number. And I think that's actually too much. The extreme resistance to critical hits for battleship makes them really good. They weren't that good before, but again, funnily enough, for Imperial Navy, most faction battleships are actually not that great. They're just too expensive for what they provide. But with Imperial Navy, their battleships are actually one of the better ones compared to other ships. So I think that the Navy gains the most from this battleship change. They can really use their battleships effectively now, and they're gonna be really good. And it also synergizes a lot with their other upgrades and abilities, which I'll talk about in a second. So now the battleship meta with Imperial Navy might be actually really good. This is kind of speculation. I'm pretty confident it should work, but I haven't actually tested it a lot. I'm gonna post some gameplay videos later to see if it actually works once the beta patch becomes live and official. Anyway, let's get to the spreadsheet and talk about the ships that we have. So you can see here that most of the ships in our lineup are actually very similar. They have very similar survivability, pretty similar DPS per cost. There are some outliers, but that's because this guy has hangars and those ships have novas. So if you take into account those, it actually turns out that the DPS again is very similar across the board. So it's hard to pick the best ship class. Like for some other races, clearly you can see that for Eldar, for example, for the Corsairs, you have their battle cruisers, which are just much more effective DPS wise and also hit point wise than other ship classes. For Necrons, again, you have those Jackal escorts, which are much more effective than everything else. but with Imperial Navy nothing really stands out, everything is mostly the same. So we'll just talk about the ships and see which ones are good and which ones are bad. So first of all, there is multiple weapon classes on your ships. You have your lances, which most of them have only 9,000 units of range, which means that they're really terrible. Anything that has those short range lances is just bad most of the time, because you cannot really benefit from the lance accuracy with such a short range. And lances are supposed to be standoff weapon with really long ranges to make use out of this precise trait, which means that you always hit. There are also longer range lances, like the ones on the Retribution, the turrets. They have 18,000 units range, which is good, and those weapons are actually good because they have good range, so even if you're at maximum range you can still hit targets all the time, and they are useful in this case. But the Gothic is just really bad cruiser. Yeah, just don't take it. And then you have all those variants like the Lunar, which has half of the lances and half of the macros. Those are also bad. Then you have Tyrant, which again mixes two different types of weaponry, the plasma batteries and the macro batteries, which again is pretty bad because you have two different range brackets, and in the plasma macro has lower DPS than a standard battery actually in exchange for range, and it's also more expensive, so you overpay for this ship. But if you use the long range, you're only shooting the macros and not or only shoot the plasma, not the normal macros, so you just have only half of the DPS, which means it's not really efficient use of your ship. And if you go in close, you use both batteries, but then you overpaid for this plasma, which you're not using, and you also lower your DPS compared to this normal battery. So those mixed armament ships are also not really good, and you should avoid them if possible. Some of the ships, most of the ships have good frontal armor and average side and rear, but you have some other ships which do not have good frontal armor, and those are worse than the ones that do have good armor. So you should also avoid those ships. But there is one exception, which I'll tell about later. And for the escorts, you have a lot of choices, but the Cobras are just terrible. The Widowmaker has increased identification range, but this is useless because it doesn't help detecting stealth ships, so just forget about those. So the only real choices are between those three: Firestorm, Sword, and Falchion, and those are actually very similar. It's mostly preference that I think the Sword is the best. It's slightly better than other ones, but not by much. So if you want to take other ones, it's also fine. They're also okay. Why is Sword the best? Sword has double turrets. Firestorm has one turret and one lance, and Falchion has 1.5 turret, because this is a smaller one, not double barrel, and torpedoes. So the way you use escorts most of the time is either you are standing on the point and the enemy is also standing on the point, and you're just shooting at each other, in which case it's a close range brawl, so the macro turret is gonna be the best. So in this case Sword wins. Another case is where you are just running away from the enemy and trying to shoot a bit at them at the same time, in which case Sword will also be the best, because this turret has 270 degrees of arc of fire, so you can run away at a 45-degree angle and increase the distance while still shooting at the enemy a bit. And the Firestorm, the lance is only front facing, so you will not be able to use it when running away. And the last case is that you are chasing somebody, and in this case the Firestorm will be the best because the lance is forward facing at the same time. You probably will have further range than the close range. The short range will be at medium range most likely, and on medium range the lance is better weapon than the macro turret. So in this case you will be the Firestorm will win against a Sword. but I find that the chasing scenario is the most rare. The most common ones are the one with the point capture standoff and running away. So sword is just the best overall, but the other ones might be okay too in some cases. Like if you have a lot of ships with torpedoes, you can take falchions to get even more torpedo spam, so more of them get through defenses. But I just don't find it worth the micromanagement, because torpedoes require micromanagement and the turrets don't. So you could maybe squeeze out more out of falchion than out of sword, but it just requires more micro, which I don't find any to spare. So I'm not taking those. I just take swords always. But others are also viable choices in some scenarios. So that is for escorts. For light cruisers, we have some options, but this one has torpedoes, which and not only 2 of those. So again, I don't find it worth microing so many ships with torpedoes. If I'm using torpedoes, I just want a big bay, like 6 or 8, so that it's actually worth the time spent microing those. Endurance has lances with short range, so it's just out. This guy has launch base, which might be useful sometime, but like you only take this if you just need some fighters for screening, which will be in one scenario maybe. But otherwise, you don't really take a lot of them. You just take one for basic fighter cover for you. And you have the Dauntless, and they also have low armor, so it's not really that great. And they're also slower, 160 speed versus Dauntless 200 speed. So pretty much the only light cruisers that are worth even considering are the Dauntless. We have Mark II with macros and turrets and torpedoes, and another one which has heavy lance artillery instead of torpedoes. So it's the same case as usual. This time it's 4 torpedoes, but I still feel I don't like microing those. So I just take the normal Dauntless, which has a pretty good lance. It's a heavy one. It's 3 DPS. It's short range, but if you have stealth and chase the enemy, since you can keep them on running silent, it is sometimes useful. But either Dauntless is fine. You can use any of those, whichever you prefer. And one of the compositions that is pretty effective is just spamming a lot of those Dauntless ships. So you just take as many as you can, either Mark 1 or Mark 2, and fill out the rest with swords a bit, so you have the scans. And then you just put everything on running silent, so the enemy doesn't know where you are. You don't actually have that much range, you only have 9k. So it's hard to kite the enemy, but they're fast, 200 speed, so you can just strategically position them, hide, and try to ambush enemy groups with superior numbers. So if enemy splits up, you just focus on one group and gang up on them and kill them, and then move up to the other one. And if we look at the chart, the Dauntless actually has one of the highest HPs per cost, so it's kind of tough. It has very decent DPS of the cost, one of the higher ones for the Imperial Navy, so it's very effective DPS wise, and hit point wise it's also fast. It has good turrets and troops per cost, so it's just a pretty good all-around ship. And it was the best composition before the patch, but like I mentioned, the patch changed the critical rates, and the bigger ships are now much more resistant to critical hits, so they might also be viable now, instead of just being able to use those cruisers. So then we move up to cruisers. We have Gothic, which has only lances, so it's bad. Lunar has hybrid lances and macros, so it's also bad. Tyrant also has hybrid weapons, so it's also bad. Which leaves us with Dictator, which has a launch bay, which I don't find that useful actually. If you want to have a launch bay ship, it's better to take Defiant and just put it on running silent and just use it from long range as a support, because this macro battery you want to be close in, and if you're close in, that means you're gonna die fast. so you don't want to lose your base ship in close combat. And this guy can just keep stealthed and provide support all the time without the risk of dying. So the only really good ship is the Dominator for cruisers. It just has your basic macros, which is pretty good weapon system. It's decent DPS on both sides, and it has a Nova Cannon. And this is actually the cheapest ship with the Nova Cannon. So people say that Adeptus Mechanicus is the one to go with the Nova spam, but you can actually spam Nova Cannons even better as Imperial Navy, because Dominators are cheaper than whatever Admech gets. If we check their ships, you can see that their cruisers cost like 200 or 190, so you're actually paying more, so you can get less Nova Cannons. So if you want a maximum number of Nova Cannons, the Imperial Navy is actually to go, the way to go. So Dominators are pretty okay ships for spamming Novas. They're just good all around. Fire Novas to weaken the enemy, and once they close, you still have a good weapon system to fight the enemy close by. So they're pretty well rounded. If somebody kites and escapes, Nova them, and if they come close, you have macros. Battle cruisers, all of them are pretty bad, to be honest, because they just have the same hull and shield as the cruisers. You get 3 more defense turrets and 1 more troop, but they are significantly more expensive. So most of the time you just want to use cruisers since they're cheaper and have the same survivability. Those guys have better DPS and they have rams, but some of the cruisers also have rams. The Overlord is the best because it has not a hybrid weapon system. It has only a single weapon system in the plasma macro battery, and you have a lance turret which has the same range, so you just have all the weapons have the same range, which means you can use them effectively. So if you want to make a more long distance fleet focused on those plasma batteries, you can take Overlords. And also there are the best rammers because they have the ram and they have a good front armor. So those are necessary requirements for a good ramming ship, and Overlord seems like the best one. Mars is just a bit of everything, but it's too expensive at 260. You can get almost a battleship for that, and you should, or even a Grand Cruiser, which has more shield and hull while being cheaper or the same cost. And Armageddon again has it has a medium range, but it has lances, which I just prefer macros to lances, I think, because they just have more overall DPS. And there is this armor piercing ammunition upgrade, which is just absolutely mandatory. No matter what composition you have, you always have to take it. It's just so good. It lets your macros be armor piercing in close range, which just makes them pretty much completely superior to lances. So because if the enemy is close by, you get armor piercing, and the guys that have heavy armor, like the Necrons or other factions that have good front armor, most of the time they will try to keep close to you. Like the Space Marines for boarding, they will close in. Necrons will also not be able to run away that far. So against those heavy armor factions, most of the time you're gonna be in close range, and just this armor piercing munition gives you so much extra DPS. Even against average armor, it's plus 50% DPS in close range. So you just want to take only macros most of the time. Just forget about lances, and use armor piercing ammo to make the macros as good as lances, basically, because they have the same armor piercing in close range as lances. Yeah, so that is about the cruisers. And then we have the Grand Cruisers. Vengeance is a hybrid weapon system, and it has lances, so just don't take it. Exorcist is 4 base and it's really expensive, so it's also kind of bad. Avenger is okay, it's very cheap, it's cheaper than the battle cruisers. It has those basic macros, so you can just, if you want a close range mid-bag with lots of hit points, lots of shield, and your standard weapon system to use armor piercing as much as possible, just take those. They would be perfect and they would be the best ship, except they don't have good front armor. They only have 67 front armor instead of 83 like other ships, so this is a problem. But they would be just too good if they also had front armor. They would just be the best ship. So they are good overall. They give you very good value. Like you can see, Avenger gives you very good HP per cost, pretty good DPS. They actually is kind of low here, but that's because it has broadside weapons, and I am counting broadside weapons only as plus 20%. Because I assume I had to pick something, and I assume that you are using both broadsides 20% of the time. But for this ship, since this is a close range ship, you're just supposed to rush into the enemy and use this armor piercing ammo. It's much easier to use both of the broadsides if you're in close range, because if you're on a standoff ship like the Retribution with the plasma weapons on long range, it's almost impossible to get both broadsides facing enemies from this long range. But if you're in the middle of them, it's very easy to just have them on both sides. So you will be using both broadsides much more often, even half the time maybe. And if you manage to efficiently use both broadsides through positioning, you can increase this DPS per cost to pretty good values. And again, armor piercing ammo also increases this value by a lot. So this is actually pretty good ship. And for the battleships, we have Retribution, which is, I think, the best one. It's a long range ship. It has 160 speed compared to the other ones which have 120 only. It still has the bad turning rate of 4 compared to 8 for other ships, but since it's a long range ship, you don't need to turn that much, and it makes the torpedoes very hard to hit though. So you have the torpedoes, and with this slow turning rate, it's gonna be really hard to hit with them, but it's still, maybe in close range you can still do it. And it also has a ram, but again, with this low rotation, it's gonna be hard to hit anything with it, and it has low maneuverability attributes, so you cannot use high energy turn to increase this low rotation speed. But it's still a good ship after the critical changes, since before it wasn't really that good, because then you just get critted on the engines and then you're just stuck in a sitting duck which cannot move anywhere. But now it's gonna be 3 times as resistant to criticals, which is very good ratio, and you should be able to survive for a really long time and be really tanky. And thanks to those long range weapons, even if you do get stuck, you still can provide support from afar until you die, which is gonna be pretty long time because it's hard to kill. Emperor is just too expensive. It has a low front armor, which is a death sentence for a battleship, since a lot of the time it will be just chasing somebody. It's slow, so just forget about it. The base are also not a good weapon system, since you want your launch base ships to be far away from battle, and battleships are for tanking, not for staying away. So it's just not good. Apocalypse, it only has lances, but and they have low range, but they have this trait where you can increase them to 18k range. I don't think it's very good. It has a Nova cannon, and it has front armor, so that's kinda okay. It's worse than Retribution, but it's also cheaper, so sometime you might want to take it in some cases. And then we have Oberon, which is just, yeah, it has both plasma and lances, and launch base, and increased identification range, but it has low front armor, which makes it unusable completely. So just forget about it, because front armor, not good front armor on the battleship is deadly, and makes it useless. Okay, so what can we actually do? With this fleet composition, we can spam macro cannons. So there's a fleet composition where you just take as many Avengers as possible, which is 5, fill up the rest with swords, and it comes out to exactly the fleet limit, which is nice. You just take the armor piercing upgrade, you take the improved shields, which is another really great Imperial Navy upgrade. It increases your effective shield hit points by 33%. And this is best on the bigger ships, since if you see the Dauntless, it has 200 divided by 1200, this is 1/6, so 1/6 of your shields are, the ratio of your shields to hull is 1/6, but for a battleship the ratio is 1/3, so the bigger ships have more shields compared to hit points, so they rely on the shields more for survival. This upgrade is best used when you have a lot of big ships. And the Avengers are the Grand Cruisers, so they are pretty big, they have 600 shields, so they will benefit a lot from this improved shields. And also the critical changes also help here a lot, because before your generator got critical hit all the time, so this wasn't very good, because if the enemy saw that you have this, they just focused your generator and your shields were dying after the first depletion, and you couldn't even use them twice. But now the heavy ships, the battle cruisers, the Grand Cruisers are twice as resistant to critical hits, and the battleships are 3 times as resistant, so it's gonna be much harder to critical hit the generator, so you will be able to use those shields for much longer. So this upgrade will give you really good value after your shields. So this is a pretty tanky but still close range fleet composition. Other fleet composition is just the light cruisers, like I mentioned. You can also spam Nova cannons, where you just take a lot of Dominators and Apocalypse, which has also Nova cannons, so you have 5. You could take 6, but I find that you should use a big battleship, so that it doesn't get focused too easily, because then you lose morale and you can just get mutinied everywhere. And with the new battleship changes, the battleships are actually pretty efficient too. And as always, you fill the rest. Now in this case I have Firestorms for some reason, I don't know why. It should be swords, and again this composition also perfectly utilizes the fleet capacity. So they just have those lucky fleet compositions that fit exactly into the limit for some reason. And here we have the ramming build, where we use the perfect fleet capacity. So almost all of the builds with Imperial Navy fit perfectly within the limit, which is a sign, I guess, that they're just optimized and good. And here we just take Overlords, which, like I said, those are the best ships for ramming, because they have spurs and good front armor. You can also ram with macros, of course, because in this case you just want to get close in anyway, because Avengers are close range ships, and they also have rams, but their weaker armor makes them take more damage, so it's just not as effective. And in the beta patch notes they also mentioned that they increased ramming damage by 50% across the board. So again, I'm not sure how exactly this Overlord composition will come out in practice, but on paper with theorycrafting alone it should be pretty good. And you also have torpedoes, which again is a good synergy with ramming, because you get on a course for torpedoes, you fire them, and then you just press the boost button, and just after the torpedo hits you follow up with the ram, and it's a deadly combination which can just kill ships outright. And overlords give you also long range DPS compared with Retribution, which also has plasma, so all your ships got plasma battery, so it's also resistant to kiting. So if you're facing Eldar, which are extremely hard to ram, you still will be able to just fight them with macro plasma batteries. And you have a lot of escorts to find Dark Eldar who are hiding, or Adelstar ships. So this might also be interesting. But again, it depends on the matchup. Like, this is gonna be bad against Eldar, and macros also are gonna be bad against Eldar because it's hard to hit them. And I guess the best chance against Eldar would be just the, I mean, Nova Cannons are gonna be bad against Eldar, and the best chance is just the regular macros, because if you manage to get in close with the boost, you should be able to just kill them with the volume of fire. Okay, let's talk about the upgrades and the tactical skills. First we have these navigational sheets, which everybody gets, and it's just not a good upgrade because you get better ones. You almost always want armor piercing and void shields. You might want to switch from void shields to the rams. If you just use this ramming power build where you just focus on the ramming, you're gonna be close by, so shields are not gonna be that effective because you take a lot of damage close by, and shields might not have time to recharge. Shields are best in long standoff engagements where you just both shoot at each other from afar, but if you're going for ramming, you expect to get heavy damage and also deal heavy damage to the enemy, so you can skip the shields in this case when you're going for the rams. It should be really fun build actually. For the light cruisers, you also don't want to use the shields because light cruisers just have only 200 shields, which is not enough to utilize this. So instead you go for emission dissipator, so you can keep stealth while running silent and using the maneuvers. But you still want to keep armor piercing. Armor piercing is just absolutely mandatory no matter what. It's just so good that you completely and absolutely need it, because otherwise you just have no chance against like Space Marines and Necrons, because they have perfect armor all around and macro cannons just do not do anything to them, and you're mostly relying on macro cannons for damage. So unless you have this upgrade, you're just gonna lose every time against Marines and Necrons. And this gives you the opposite, because if you have this upgrade, you can just laugh at their armor and beat them very easily. Like, if you do have armor piercing, you should win almost every game against Space Marines and the Necrons, because the only thing that they have is the armor, and you just remove their armor with this, so they have nothing else left. So it should be easy wins with this. Using all of the builds, no matter which build you are using, it should still be easy, because just armor piercing is too good. All of those builds use a lot of macro cannons, and yeah, that's the best way. Then we have the shield capacitors. It might be tempting to use both the void shield upgrade and the recharge, so you just stack everything on the shield. They are 33% tougher, they recharge 25% faster, so you get a synergy there. But I just find that armor piercing is absolutely necessary. It's not worth it. This is good upgrade, yes, combined with this, but armor piercing is just better. Unless you know that you're facing, you're in a pre-made skirmish or something where you know you'll be facing Eldar, where you know this is not gonna be useful because they will kite, or they just have 50 base armor, so this does nothing. Then you can use this against Eldar, but that's only if you really know that you will be facing Eldar, or maybe if you just play multiplayer and you absolutely hate losing against Eldar, and you think that you can still do fine against other factions, but yeah, you won't really do fine, because the Space Marines and Necrons will absolutely destroy you if you don't have this. So it's not really an option unless you really know that you will be facing Eldar, but that's in ranked, that's not applicable. So yes, you have to take armor piercing. And then you have all those other upgrades like short billboard torpedoes, increased flagship range, and assassin, which are very niche. I guess the assassin might be cool if you play 2v2 ranked and you both play Imperial Navy and you both take assassins, and then you lightning strike the same ship. So you get instant mutiny because morale bar is 1000 units, and you can with double assassin just completely instantly deplete it before the enemy has a chance to use the rally skill to get it up. And if that was the flagship, you can deal some heavy blow to the enemy. So you can have some fun with this in 2v2, but in 1v1 half of the bar is just not good enough. Yeah, so it's also not really usable in 1v1. And for the technicals, you most of the time want this supercharged void shield because this is a really good synergy with this shield upgrade. Your shields are 33% stronger, your battleships have very good shields. So if you use your battleships efficiently, you will be able to survive for a very long time, especially in 2v2. In 2v2 it's more significant because you have less ships. If you have a battleship and you time it right, you can really make it extremely tanky with the skill. And the best way to use it is you have to time it right, because this skill provides two benefits. First, it makes the shield invulnerable, so you take no damage. And the second benefit is that it multiplies shield regeneration 10 times, which is a lot, but it only lasts 10 seconds. So if you just use it whenever, it will most likely will only be able to use one of those benefits. Since if you use it in the middle of a firefight, you only will have the invulnerability, and if you just use it away, you only get the recharge. But you can also, it's kind of risky, but you can try to time it, because shield regeneration kicks in after 10 seconds of not taking any damage. So if you can manage to avoid enemy fire for like 5 or 6 seconds, then you can activate this skill, and that means that your shields do not take any damage, they're invulnerable. So any damage will not stop this timer. So since already 6 seconds pass without taking any damage, after 4 seconds of this skill, the shield regeneration will kick in, and you will get 10 times the regeneration for 6 remaining seconds. So ideally, you want to use this whenever there is a break in the enemy firing pattern, like if they have a lot of lances, for example. They just shoot at you a bunch of lances. So you wait after the first salvo fires, your shields are mostly depleted, and then just before the second wave comes, after like 5 or 6 seconds, you can activate the skill. You will absorb all the lance fire from the next wave because your shields are indestructible, and you will also get a lot of regeneration at the same time. So it's kind of tricky to time it right, but you can really get a lot of value out of this, especially in 2v2 where it's more significant, each ship. But even in 1v1, this is a really good skill if you time it right. But even if you don't time it, it's still pretty good. Then you have your usual bombs. The disruption bomb is slightly weaker in the patch. They decreased they increased the time it takes to explode, so it's harder to hit. But with this huge 4k unit radius, it's still easy to hit. And they increased the cooldown to 90 seconds, but still one of the best bombs, just because the radius is so large and shields are annoying, and they effectively do a lot of damage to the enemy by disabling them for 20 seconds. So it's still one of the best skills, so it's still probably the second skill you're going to be taking most of the time. And the only other skills that are really worth considering is you can take the Augur Disruptor if you're running the sneaky, stealthy Dauntless fleet. since they'll all be running silent, and our disruptor can allow you to avoid detection even if the enemy is close, assuming they have no escorts. So you have to focus fire escorts first, and then you can use this to basically be completely undetectable for 45 seconds. And you can also sometimes use micro warp jump in 2v2 ranked. It's not really good in 1v1 because just moving one ship is not significant enough. So most of the time you'll be running, I guess, disruption bomb. This is the most universal one for most of your compositions. Just watch out so you don't hit your own ships with it, since you're taking the shield upgrades and your shields are good. Don't hit yourself, because losing your own shields is painful. And yeah, that's basically it. Imperial Navy is actually easier to play than you would expect, but there is a lot of ships to choose from, and people just choose the bad ones very often, the trap options. But hopefully with this guide you'll be able to make good, efficient compositions, and you will contribute to increase the very low win rate of Imperial Navy in ranked. So when we get next report, it's gonna be higher, and I guess the battleship changes will help a lot too, since people very often use battleships with Imperial Navy because they just like the big ships, which look very cool. Yeah, the battleships do look very cool, so I wholly support this decision to make them better, because they weren't really that great before, but now with very high critical resistance they might become viable again. Yeah, have fun, try out the builds, especially the ramming build, which might be really good in the new beta, and also the battleship one, where you can in 2v2 just take 2 battleships, Retribution and Apocalypse, and use the shield upgrade to be really tanky, and the Void Shield recharge skill too, and so you can just tank a ton of damage on those improved shields. And yeah, have fun and see you in the next video soon.